ऑल राइट, तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं। हेलो एवरीवन, दिस इज नमन एंड मैं आप सबका आज PSIR लेक्चर नंबर 53 में हम्बली वेलकम करता हूं। जैसे कि आप स्लाइड्स में देख पा रहे होंगे फ्रेंड्स, आज हम डिस्कस करने जा रहे हैं हैना अरेंट की व्यू ऑन टोटैलिटेरियनिज्म, जो उनकी किताब ऑन द ओरिजिन ऑफ टोटैलिटेरियनिज्म से आती है। ये हैना अरेंट की वन ऑफ द वेरी वेरी प्रोफाउंड एंड ओरिजिनल कॉन्सेप्ट है, जिनके लिए हैना अरेंट काफ़ी प्रोमिनेंट एंड फेमस हैं वेस्टर्न पॉलिटिकल स्फीयर में। तो विदाउट एनी फर्दर अड्यू चलिए शुरू करते हैं। बट आज की लेक्चर शुरू करने से पहले मैं आप सबको दिखाना चाहता हूँ PYQs, जो आज के लेक्चर के बाद आप बिल्कुल जाके अटेम्प्ट करेंगे एंड अपने आंसर स्क्रिप्ट मुझे शेयर करेंगे टेलीग्राम लिंक में, जो मैं डिस्क्रिप्शन में मेंशन करने वाला हूँ। ठीक है, तो आज जैसा कि आप देख पा रहे हैं PYQ हैना अरेंट से अब तक 3 पूछे गए हैं, जिसमें 2 क्वेश्चन नंबर 2 एंड क्वेश्चन नंबर 3 इज डायरेक्टली फ्रॉम द concept of totalitarianism of Hannah Arendt, right? So this particular concept of Hannah Arendt becomes very very important for us to see in its comprehensive aspects, right? तो इसी मुद्दे को मद्देनजर रखते हुए मैं आप सबको टोटैलिटेरियनिज्म की जो कॉन्सेप्ट है हैना अरेंट की, उसको काफी डिटेल में डिस्कस करने जाएंगे। एंड ऑल्सो मैं आपको इसकी वेरियस एस्पेक्ट, इसकी कंपैरिजन विद ऑथोरिटेरियनिज्म, राइट? बहुत लोग इसको मिस्टेक करते हैं कि टोटैलिटेरियनिज्म एंड ऑथोरिटेरियनिज्म में डिफरेंस क्या है। देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन द टू टर्मिनोलॉजीज, राइट? वी विल सी व्हाट आर द वेरियस फीचर्स ऑफ टोटैलिटेरियनिज्म, वी विल सी व्हाट अ टोटैलिटेरियन regime is all about, right? We will see how Hannah Arendt particularly criticized totalitarianism, right? We will cover it in its 360 degree, right? Or a complete overlook or overview of totalitarianism of Hannah Arendt, right? So with this, let's get started. But दोस्तों मैं आप सबसे एक बात कहना चाहता हूं कि आप मुझे देख नहीं पा रहे हैं इन लेक्चर के दौरान, क्योंकि एक टेक्निकल ग्लिच हो चुका है। इसके कारण मैं आशा करता हूं कि मसलन आप मुझे देख नहीं पा रहे होंगे, लेकिन मेरी आवाज़ आप सब तक पहुंच पा रही होगी एंड आप सब मुझसे कनेक्ट कर पा रहे होंगे। मैं कोशिश करूंगा जल्दी से जल्दी ये टेक्निकल ग्लिच सॉल्व हो एंड मैं वापस से आप सबको देख पाऊं एंड समझ पाऊं। ऑलराइट, सो विद दिस लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड with the concept of Hannah Arendt on totalitarianism. All right, so why she has propounded this idea of totalitarianism, that becomes something very very important for us to know, right? So again friends, the idea of Lasky comes, and आप सबको अब तक तो रट ही गया होगा what is the idea of Lasky, right? He says that every thinker is a child of his or her time, right? Every thinker is a child of his or her time, right? Child of time. Similarly, Hannah Arendt was a child of the time of Nazi's regime in Germany, right? And since she herself experienced the atrocities which was undertaken by Nazi's regime on the Jew community, right? And the matter of the fact is that she herself belonged to a Jew community, right? In order to save her life, she had to flee her motherland, that was Germany, to various countries like Paris, to United States and etc., right? Where she finally got her citizenship in United States and started practicing teaching as her professional, right? So that is why from this particular experience we also derive her methodology, that was phenomenology, that we have just discussed in the yesterday's lecture, right? If you haven't watched the previous lecture, it is very interesting. Go after this lecture and have the watch of the previous lecture. It will give you a comprehensive understanding of the methodology, that is phenomenology. Okay, so what is the significance of Hannah Arendt views on totalitarianism? It is one of the best analysis that we have on totalitarianism. Yes friends, it is one of the best in the sense that it is one of the very very realistic, one of very very pragmatic and comprehensive analysis on totalitarianism that has been given by Hannah Arendt on in her book, that is on the origin of totalitarianism, right? So what is the basic overview of totalitarianism, right? What is totalitarianism? As you can see on the slide, right? What is totalitarianism? So Totalitarianism is a totalitarianism. So you all might be thinking, sir, what are you saying that totalitarianism is totalitarianism? क्या आप joke कर रहे हैं? No, friend, I'm not joking, because there is no replacement for the term totalitarianism, because it is unprecedented in the history. Unprecedented in the history. Why unprecedented in the history? Because there is not any event which is similar to the atrocities that has been created by the totalitarian regime, right? So that is why we cannot find, or we do not find, any terminology to define what totalitarianism is. So totalitarianism is totalitarianism, right? So as we can see, there is no other example nor words to express the feeling of those who have undergone the totalitarianism, right? And Hannah Arendt herself is an epitome. She is an epitome. She is an example of the totalitarian regime, right? Because she herself was in the position, right? So it can be experienced. To understand totalitarianism, one has to be a Jew, right? One has to be a Jew in Germany during time of Hitler, right? However, Hannah Arendt explained totalitarianism as a reign of terror, of violence, right? But see, she is clearly telling us in her book that there is no definition, there is no word, there is no expression which can clearly define what a totalitarianism is, right? If one wants to understand what really totalitarianism means, one have to be a Jew during the regime of Hitler in Germany, right? Until and unless we do not experience the atrocities, the heinous crimes that were committed on the Jew community in the Germany, we will not be able to experience, we will not be able to feel what is totalitarianism is. Right? Again, from where this idea is coming from, again, this idea is emerging from her methodology of phenomenology, right? Phenomenology, because they tend to focus more on the live experiences in the consciousness, right? And until and unless we do not go through the same process, the same crimes, the same atrocities, how we will be able to feel, right? How we will be able to experience, how we will be able to empathize with the victims of the atrocities, victims of the heinous crime that was created during the Nazis regime in Germany, right? So that is why it is unexpressible, it is ineffable, right? It is ineffable. It cannot be expressed in terms, right? There is no word which can define totalitarianism, right? But totalitarianism characterizes with the sense that it is a rule of violence. It is a rule of violence, right? So in majority of the rules, in majority of the system of government, violence is a means, right? Violence is a means to attain an end, right? Violence is a means to an end, right? But when we talk about totalitarian regime, the violence becomes an end in itself. Violence ही सब कुछ बन जाता है, violence ही एक गवर्नमेंट का एंड बन जाता है. Why? Because they started suppressing people. They started suppressing the dissents that arise out of the public, right? That is why they always resort to the violence in order to suppress any dissenting comments, beliefs, value that is surfacing from the public, right? So in totalitarian regime, the violence becomes an end rather than a means to something, right? So this is what is totalitarianism as defined by Hannah Arendt, right? But we will see what is totalitarianism, right? How or why, what do we understand by totalitarianism? The terms, the regime, right? The regime, what do we understand by it? So totalitarianism is a form of government characterized by centralized dictatorial control over all aspects of public and private life, right? So what are the features are basically totalitarianism is centralized authority, centralized power, right? And it tend to have a dictatorial control over all sphere of life, from social to political to economical, right, to cultural to moral, all aspects of life in public and private life. This is what a totalitarianism means, right? What do I mean when I say that it have a dictatorial control over all aspects of public and private life? We cannot choose to do what we want to do, right? In dictatorial control, we have to follow what regimes propounds, what regimes tries to propagate, right? In their propaganda, right? That is why propaganda becomes, or ideology becomes, a central premise over which a dictatorial regime is built, right? Here the plurality, the sense of plurality that we have in today's democracies are completely eliminated, right? We have diverse culture, we have multiple religion, and etc. But in dictatorial, in totalitarian regime, we cannot do that. If we do that, the regime, the man, right, who is at the helm, like Hitler, their regime, their bureaucratic, their administrative sphere will come and suppress us. Their police will come and try eliminate us. That is why we have no ideological independence. We do not have any ideological autonomy. Whatever states propagate, we have to follow that simply. If states wants us to be a Hindu, we have to be a Hindu. If states want us to be Christians, we have to be Christians. If states want us to eat in particular manner, we have to do that. If states want us to shower at particular time, we have to do that. We do not have any autonomy, right? When we live in totalitarian regime. And this is what a totalitarianism means, right? And this is what a dictatorial control over all aspects of public and private life means, right? All aspects, right? We do not have our individuality. We do not have our individuality in the totalitarian regime. We cannot practice the profession that we want to practice. We only have to do what we got as a dictate from the state. Right? In a totalitarian regime, the state seeks to exert absolute authority and dominance over its citizens, leaving no room for individual freedoms or dissent. Right? As I have just said, there is an absolute authority and dominance over its citizens, right? And we do not have any room left out to express our own freedom, to express our own individuality. Right? So this is what a totalitarianism looks like when I have to define it in certain terms. Right? But still, the words cannot define it. Why? Because whatever definition we have just seen is nothing but are the features of the totalitarian regime, right? That we have centralized absolute power. It is dictatorial in nature, right? This is what a feature of totalitarianism, right? So that is why Hannah Arendt says that we cannot express what totalitarianism is in sheer words. We have to be a Jew during the time of Hitler regime in Germany in order to understand what totalitarianism really feels like. Right? So this is what a totalitarianism is, right? Now let's see some of the key features of totalitarianism, right? Some of the key features of totalitarianism. So first is centralized authority, as we have already discussed, right? Like power is concentrated in the hands of single leader, party, or ruling elite, right? So if we talk about, let's say, a single leader, right? The most eminent name that comes to my mind is Hitler, right? The entire power was concentrated in his hand. Whatever he thought right was the right for the state. This is what a centralized authority is. This is also known as cult personality. And this is one of the very, very important feature of totalitarian regime. Whenever in any state, remember friends, whenever in any state, if there is a surfacing of any cult personality, what do I mean when I say that surfacing of cult personality? It means that there is over important to any particular individual, one individual, right? The entire system starts circumventing around this one individual, right? The entire political ideologies start surfacing from this particular individual. Then there is an advent, there is an emergence of cult personality. right? This also gives right to what? This also gives rise to God complex. What is God complex? Have you saw the movie Sacred Games? Right there, the Siddiqui, the actor, right? He says, "Apun hi Bhagwan hai. I am God." Right? This is what a God complex is, and this is what a centralized authority in totalitarian regime looks like. When there is a too much importance that is given to one individual, which gives rise to a tendency of cult personality and ultimately leads to a God complex, where that particular individual will resort to the ideas beneficial for the state, which he thinks right for the state, right? It does not mean that that particular thing or thought is good for state, but if he thinks that yes, the Aryan supremacy is right, then yes, people have to accept it without any dissent. And if people will dissent it, there is a strong police who will suppress them. Right? This is what centralized authority is. The second one is total control, as I have already discussed, right? This centralized authority will have an absolute total control over all aspects of life, from politics to economics to culture to education to religion and etc. Right? If we talk about the Germany, there was a Hitler system of education. Right? Even Heidegger, the teacher of Hannah Arendt, right? He was hired by the Hitler regime in order to formulate an education system to promote the Nazis propaganda, right? This is how there is a total control, absolute control over all spheres of private and public life in totalitarian regime, right? The third one is ideological purity. So totalitarian regime will always promote a single ideology or belief, in the sense of ultimate truth, right? And any dissent or opposition to this ideology is harshly suppressed, right? If we talk about the Hitler regime, again, the Aryan supremacy, the concept of Aryan's supremacy is the best example of this. That the Aryans or the Aryans are the superior race, and the people like Jews and etc., they are inferior race, and hence the Aryans should eliminate the inferior race. This is what led to the mass killing like genocide in the Germany, right? That is why they have a strong sense of ideological purity, right? Or if I have to be specific, the ideological purity is their priority, priority, right? Every other thing, that is economic, politics, culture, education, is secondary. Ideological purity of, let's say, a single religion or supremacy and etc., it is the priority of the totalitarian regime. They can go to any extent in order to get it established in their state, right? If the let's say Hinduism is the state ideology, right? They can go to any extent in order to get our state a Hindu Rashtra. I am not saying whether it is right or wrong or false or true, but this is what an example will look like if we have to do that. If a state chooses Islam as a state religion, right, and they focus on ideological purity, they can go to any extent in order to get Islam established as their state ideology, and hence there will be no room left for disagreement. People who will dissent against the ideological purity, they will be suppressed with iron hand, right? So this is what ideological purity is. The fourth one is propaganda and indoctrination. What is propaganda? Propaganda and state-controlled media are used to manipulate public opinion, right? Spread ideological messages and glorify the regime and its leaders, right? So in Hitler's regime, Hitler had a minister of media, right? He had a minister especially dedicated for media who was responsible to propagate the propaganda of Hitler, to propagate the propaganda of Hitler, right, so as to reach to the masses, which ultimately leads to mass mobilization, right? And what is the role of media? What is the role of media? Again, connect this concept to Gramsci's idea of intellectuals, right? Gramsci's idea of intellectuals, Gramsci's ideas of superstructure, how the superstructure of which media was also a part helps in shaping or creating hegemony of dominant class, right? Hegemony of dominant class, राइट? अगर आपने मेरे ग्रामसी की लेक्चर देखी होंगी ऑन हेजेमनी, तो आप अभी रिलेट कर पा रहे होंगे कि मीडिया कितना इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करता है इन ऑर्डर टू एस्टैब्लिश द हेजेमनी. व्हाट इज हेजेमनी? द सॉफ्ट पावर दैट इज क्रिएटेड इन द माइंड ऑफ द पीपल, right, which helps in shaping the values, shaping the opinion, shaping the public view of the people, राइट? आपको ऐसा कुछ दिखा दिया जाएगा जिससे आपको लगेगा कि ये जो रिजाइन कर रही है वो जस्टिफाइबल है, वो सही है हम सब के लिए, राइट? बट वो इररेस्पेक्टिव ऑफ ट्रू और फॉल्स, वो उनका प्रोपेगेंडा होता है जो वो आपको दिखाना चाहते हैं, राइट? दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंड ड्यूरिंग द नासिस हिटलर रिजाइम एज वेल. लोगों को इतना मैनिपुलेट किया गया कि हिटलर की हर एक्शन फ्रॉम जेनोसाइड टू मास सप्रेशन उन्हें सही लगने लगा. वो सच मानने लग गए कि आर्यंस सुपीरियर हैं एंड ज्यूज एंड एक्सेट्रा दे आर द इंफीरियर एंड हेंस दे मस्ट बी एलिमिनेटेड, दे मस्ट बी एक्सटर्मिनेटेड. Right? This is what a feature of totalitarianism is. They rely heavily on propaganda and indoctrination. Until and unless वो लोगों के दिमाग में हेजेमनी नहीं क्रिएट करेंगे, लोगों की ओपिनियंस, वैल्यूज को अपने अकॉर्डिंगली मोल्ड नहीं करेंगे, वो लोगों की फेथ, वो लोगों की बिलीफ नहीं जीत पाएंगे, राइट? एंड पीपल आर द सुप्रीम, पीपल आर द सॉवरेन, राइट? अगर वो लोग उनके साथ नहीं हैं, तो अगर ये कुछ ऐसा करें तो लोग उन्हें तुरंत डिसेंड कर देंगे, लोग उन्हें तुरंत हटा देंगे रिवॉल्यूशन के थ्रू, राइट? बट सबसे पहले इनका मेन प्रायोरिटी होता है दोस्तों द टोटलिटेरियन रिजाइम का, कि प्रोपेगेंडा करके, इंडोक्ट्रिनेशन करके लोगों को मैनिपुलेट करके अपने साइड में लाया जाए, राइट? एंड वही प्रोपेगेंडा ये बेच के लोगों की विश्वास जीतते हैं एंड लोगों को ही विक्टिम बना देते हैं अपने गलत कामों का, राइट? दिस इज व्हाई हैना आरेंट विल प्रोपाउंड द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ बेनालिटी ऑफ एविल, बेनालिटी ऑफ एविल, राइट? व्हाट इज बेनालिटी ऑफ एविल? जो लोग रहते हैं, जो लोग गलत काम कर लेते हैं, वो गलत इंसान नहीं होते, वो सिर्फ एक प्रोपेगेंडा, इंडोक्ट्रिनेशन का शिकार होते हैं, right? So this is one of the very important feature. The fifth one is mass surveillance, right? लोगों को अगर आपको अपने कंट्रोल में रखना है, you have to deploy mass surveillance, all right, in order to monitor and control the activities and thought of their citizens, often using technology to track individuals' movement and communication, right? So as to track any dissent, any disagreement that is taking shape among the public, right? So they deploy mass surveillance in order to control and monitor the movements, the communication of the people, right? This was the fifth. The sixth feature is fear and intimidation. What is fear and intimidation? The regime relies on fear, intimidation, and violence to maintain control with secret police, arbitrary arrest, torture, and execution, right? So that there is a sense of fear among the people and they always keep themselves abided by the rules and regulation of the totalitarian regime, right? This is what a fear and intimidation is all about, right? If there is a no sense of fear, people will tend to disagreement, right? People will dissent, right? Because again, remember that the Hobbes concept, right? That there is no what? There is no right? If you remember the Locke's idea of covenant without sword, right, is nothing but a word, is nothing but a word. Covenant without sword is nothing but a word. So what is sword here? Sword is fear and intimidation, right? So if there is no fear and intimidation, people will resort to dissent, agreement, and hence they will also try to revolt, right? That is why fear and intimidation becomes one of the important feature in the totalitarian regime, right? What is the next feature? Cult personality. As I have already told you, right? The entire political practice, entire political sphere, right, entire ideology, they start to circulate within a single individual, right? So totalitarian leaders often cultivate a cult personality, portraying themselves as infallible and omnipotent figure worthy of adoration and loyalty, right? They become infallible. What is infallible? That is cannot be defeated, defeated, right? And hence they start seeking what? Loyalty and adoration from the people, from Mao Zedong to Joseph Stalin and so forth, right? These all are the cult personalities of our world, right? No rule of law. Like, of course, right, totalitarian regime typically disregard the rule of law, with arbitrary and capricious decisions made by the leaderships superseding any legal framework, right? So whatever the leadership will think, right, whatever they deems fit for the people, that is what will be considered as a rule, right? Dictate, that is what will be considered as a dictate of regime, right? Dictate of the regime. And hence there is no provision of rule of law or anything of such sort, right? So these are some of the key features of totalitarian regime. If I have to summarize it, right, so the first feature will be the centralized authority, the second one is the total absolute control, the third one is ideological purity, right? There is only one ideological priority of the state. The fourth one is propaganda and indoctrination. The fifth one is mass surveillance. The sixth one is fear and intimidation. The sixth one is cult personality, and there is no rule of law, which is the seventh feature of totalitarian regime, right? So this is what is the constitution or characterization of totalitarian regime, which makes the life, the individuality of the individual very, very difficult in the totalitarian regime, right? So now the next concept is basically the differentiation between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, right? Oftentimes people tend to use these two terms interchangeably, right? We tend to use this word interchangeably, but there is a difference between the two words. Difference in the sense that, friends, authoritarianism is a little bit soft, but totalitarianism is extreme. Totalitarianism is an extreme, right? So now let's see what is the difference between both of the two regimes, right? So authoritarian regime, they are basically have limited political pluralism, right? Political pluralism in the sense there will be political pluralism, but it will be limited in the sense that there will be, let's say, different political opposition party, right? There will be opposition party, but this opposition party will be controlled by the authority. They will be controlled by the authority, like one in the Russia, right? There are oppositions, but they are heavily controlled by the authorities, right? Authoritarian regime of Putin, right? If they tend to create any dissent or disagreement within the population, within the public, they are sent behind the bars, right? So there is a provision of limited political pluralism in authoritarian regime. But when we talk about the totalitarian regime, there is a absolute control. There is no political pluralism. There is no pluralism at all. Why? Because whatever the regime will dictate needs to be considered as the dictate or the rule of the state, right? So there is no political pluralism, no dissents, no disagreements, no opposition, not at all. It is basically a one-man system, right? One-man system. right? But when we talk about the authoritarian regime, there is a limited political pluralism. The second difference is selective repression, right? In authoritarianism, there is only a selective repression, right? Selective repression in the sense the people or the group who tend to create any sort of dissent or disagreement among the people, then they will be repressed using police or iron hand, right? This is what authoritarianism is. But in totalitarianism, the violence, right, as I have told you, the violence, it becomes end in itself. The violence itself becomes an end, right? Any person can be killed any day, right? We don't know, right? So here, because there is no covenant, right? There is no covenant or rule to look into it, right? So that is why it is mainly driven by terror and surveillance, right? That is why the violence becomes end. But here the violence remains means, right? In authoritarian regime, the violence remains means in order to suppress any dissenting opinions among either individuals or group, right? So this is the second difference. The third one is centralized authority, that is single ruler, party or military can hold the centralized power, right? But in totalitarian regime, it is basically driven by the cult personality, that is one man army, one man show, right? One man show, as we have seen in the case of Hitler, how his personality was regarded as a cult personality, right? A god, and whatever he deems fit for the people, वो लोगों के लिए सही था, वो लोगों के लिए एक डिक्टाट था गॉड के द्वारा, right? So this is what a totalitarian regime is mainly driven by a cult personality. But here in authoritarian regime, we have centralized authority which will constitute of people, right? Or it can again be headed by a single ruler or a party or military, right? For example, the Communist Party in China, right? The fourth one is limited ideological coherence, right? What does this particular thing mean when I say limited ideological coherence? So there may be official ideology, right? So there may be official ideology, but often it is less pervasive, right? They will not completely try to eliminate the people who are falling in the purview of any different ideological coherence than the state ones, right? It is very less pervasive. They will not try to completely make a state as a single religion state, right? A Islam state, a Christian state. They will never do that, despite they might have a state ideology, right? But it is not pervasive. They will not try to eliminate the dissenting or the people differing from the state ideology, right? But in the totalitarian regime, it is completely opposite, right? Here we have a total ideological coherence, right? So regime seeks to control not only people's action but also their thoughts, beliefs and beliefs, often through propaganda, right? So here people have to behave, people have to think, people have to act according to the state's propaganda, according to the state's ideology, right? So there is a total ideological coherence, right? In the totalitarian regime, we cannot think, we cannot act, we cannot behave as per our own wants, right? We have to do what states makes or thinks right for us, right? So in authoritarian regime, there is mainly a economic focus, right? The best example is communist China. Communist China, in order to promote any single interest, that is in economic interest, the Communist Party had to create a authority, right? So that there is a stability, there is a status quo in the country, right? There is a status quo in the country, right? Again a unique feature of capitalism, right? So in order to promote the economic interest, people will always want stability, people will always want the status in the society, right? So in order to create stability, in order to create status quo, the Communist Party, they tend to have a authoritarian mode of operation, right? So that there is a stability and status quo in the society, and hence the economic interest can be promoted, the business, the trade and the economy of the country can be grown in much better and efficient manner, right? So this is why they resort to authoritarianism, this is why they resign to a limited political pluralism, right? But when we talk about the totalitarianism, it mainly is driven by mass mobilization. What does this mean? So whatever state thinks fit for the people, the mass have to follow it, right? Mass have to follow it, right? So whatever state wants people to do it, the mass have to do it, right? So what are the example is the very contemporary example of authoritarian regime is again Russia under Vladimir Putin, right, the current president of Russia. And the second one is China under Communist Party and premiership of Xi Jinping, right? Very contemporary examples. But again, totalitarianism, unprecedented, there is no other example like totalitarianism, right? So the best example is Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, Soviet Russia under Joseph Stalin, and North Korea under Kim dynasty. These are some of the examples of totalitarianism, right? So there was a recent story about North Korea elections, right, of Kim dynasty, how the people were forced to vote only to the Kim Jong-un of Kim dynasty, and if they ought to dissent, if they have dissented or disagreed, they might have eliminated or executed or killed, right? So this is what a totalitarian regime looks, right? There will be an option, but you do not have option. Why? Because if you choose other option, you will be killed by the police of that totalitarian regime, right? So this is what a totalitarian regime is all about, friend. And I am hoping that you guys have understood the difference between the authoritarian and totalitarian regime, right? So despite it is used interchangeably in today's political parlance, but they are not the same. There is a difference, right? There is a difference because totalitarianism is always about the extreme conditionality, right, which is unprecedented and only was existed during the time of Nazi Germany, during the time of Stalinism in Russia, and Kim Jong-un or the Kim dynasty in the North Korea, right? So this is what is the difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Okay, so now let's see how totalitarianism of 20th century, right, has been different from the earlier authoritarian regimes, right? Earlier authoritarian regime. So what are the earlier authoritarian regimes, right? Remember Plato concept of philosopher king, right? We can also consider this as an earlier form of authoritarian regime, right? So now we will be comparing how totalitarianism of 20th century, right? What were the totalitarian regime of 20th century? Nazi Germany, right? Again, Stalin Russia, right? These are some of the totalitarianism of 20th century and how they are different from the earlier authoritarian regime, right? So let's see this. There is no other example in the history because the scale of violence that is used under Hitler and Stalin has been unprecedented, right? So one line clear to the point difference is that the 20th century totalitarianism, that is of Nazi Germany under Hitler or Stalin's Russia under Joseph Stalin, is unprecedented. Why? Because of the scale of violence they have deployed, right, in order to suppress the state, in order to mold the state as per their own wants, right? So there is no any authority in the history which was similar to that of Nazi's Germany or Stalin Russia, right? The totalitarian state not only controls action and speech, it also tries to control the soul, right? It tries to control souls, right? Why souls? Because as I have already told you, soul is something very, very individual. Soul is something very, very subjective, right? So by molding the values, opinion, thoughts, and etc., which are very, very subjective in nature, they tend to control the soul, right? So अगर मैं आपको इसे एकदम easy शब्दों में बताऊं दोस्तों, तो क्या है? हमारी जो थिंकिंग है, हमारी जो ओपिनियंस है, हमारी जो बिहेवियर्स हैं, एक्शंस है, हमारी सब्जेक्टिविटी है वो, राइट? वो हमारी पर्सनल इंडिविजुअलिटी है, राइट? जैसा हम सोचते हैं वो जरूरी नहीं है कि सारे लोग सोचे। बट टोटलिटेरियन रिजाइम में क्या होता है, प्रोपेगेंडा के थ्रू सब लोगों की थिंकिंग हम सेम कर देते हैं। लोगों की जो इंडिविजुअलिटी, उनका जो सोचने का ऑटोनॉमी या इंडिपेंडेंस होता है, उसे हम कंप्लीटली मार देते हैं, राइट? प्रोपेगेंडा कर करके लोगों की जो व्यूज हैं दुनिया को लेके, उसे हम एकदम एक कर देते हैं। उन्हें लगने लगता है कि जो स्टेट कर रही है वो सब सही है, राइट? एंड इस सोच के कारण ही वो मास वायलेंस में उतर आते हैं। उन्हें सब चीज सही लगने लग जाता है एक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ऑन, right? This is how the totalitarian regime, they take control of the soul, right? Because by eliminating the individuality, right? So in other authoritarian regime, violence was a means to an end, right? In other authoritarian, violence was a means to an end in order to suppress, right? Suppress the dissent so that they can have stability in the society, and hence they can promote the growth, right? But in totalitarianism, what happens? The violence itself becomes an end, right? The violence itself becomes an end, right? Why? Because of their what? Because of their ideological coherence, because of their ideological coherence, right? What do I mean when I say ideological coherence, right? So friends, the world, the entire world, I am not talking about any country, the entire world is based on pluralism. The entire world is based on pluralism. We do not have to talk about world, right? मुझे प्लूरलिज्म को प्रूफ करने के लिए पूरी वर्ल्ड की बात नहीं करनी है, हमें सिर्फ अपने घर पे ही आप देख लीजिए, आपके सारे भाई बहन, आपके लोग जो आपके घर में रह रहे हैं, वो सारे सेम नहीं होंगे, राइट? The human beings are characterized by diversity, pluralism, right? हम सबकी अपनी अपनी इंडिविजुअलिटी है, हम सबकी अपनी अपनी सब्जेक्टिवनेस है, राइट? बट टोटलिटेरियन रिजाइम की वन ऑफ द वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फीचर क्या है? वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फीचर इज आइडियोलॉजिकल कोहेरेंस। वो सिर्फ एक यूनिटी, वो सिर्फ एक स्टेट आइडियोलॉजी की बात करते हैं, एंड जो लोग उनकी स्टेट आइडियोलॉजी में फॉल नहीं करेंगे, उन्हें वो लोग क्या करेंगे? एग्जीक्यूट कर देंगे। जो हुआ ज्यूस के साथ में इन नाजी जर्मनी, राइट? दे वेयर नॉट फॉलिंग अंडर द स्टेट आइडियोलॉजी ऑफ आर्यन सुप्रीमेसी। क्या हुआ उनके साथ? उनके साथ जीनोसाइड हुआ, उनके साथ मास एक्सटर्मिनेशन हुआ, राइट? इसीलिए वायलेंस ही एंड बन जाता है टोटलिटेरियन रिजाइम में, राइट? क्योंकि उन्हें किसी ना किसी को मारना है, उन्हें किन्हीं ना किन्हीं को सोसाइटी से एलिमिनेट करना है, राइट? अब वो कैसे कर पाएंगे? वो ऑफ कोर्स वायलेंस के थ्रू ही कर पाएंगे। इसीलिए वायलेंस बिकम्स एंड इन इटसेल्फ। आई एम होपिंग आपको समझ में आ रहा होगा, एंड अगर आप इसे लाइक कर रहे हैं तो प्लीज विथ ओपन हार्ट, please show your love by subscribing and also liking the video, right? The fourth aspect is the foundation of totalitarian state is terror, and terror is justified by the use of ideology, right? So terror becomes the foundation of totalitarianism. डर, fear, intimidation. अगर आप स्टेट को फॉलो नहीं करते हो तो आप मार दिए जाओगे, right? So terror becomes the foundation of totalitarianism. Terror and ideology are two instruments of totalitarian state, right? बट जो मजे की बात है दोस्तों, ये है कि ये दोनों एक टेंडम में काम करते हैं, एक साथ काम करते हैं। पहले आइडियोलॉजी फैला के आप सबको एकजुट किया जाता है, फिर आपको टेरिफाई किया जाता है। वहीं पहले आपको टेरिफाई किया जाता है, फिर आपको आइडियोलॉजिकल मोल्ड में सेव किया जाता है, right? So this is how the terror and ideology, they becomes the foundation of the totalitarian state, and hence the totalitarian regime of 20th century remains unprecedented in the history of the world, because the world has not seen any such regime or any event which has been undertaken by the Nazi regime or Joseph Stalin's Russia in the history of the world. Now let's see how Hannah Arendt, she criticizes totalitarianism in her work that is on the origin of totalitarianism, right? The central theme of this book of Hannah Arendt is the criticism of totalitarianism, right? So now we are going to see the entire importance and significance of this particular book for a political science student, right? So let's talk about the title itself. That is how Arendt criticizes totalitarianism in the title itself, right? And what is the title of the book? It is basically the origin of totalitarianism, right? How the totalitarianism started or originated, right? So in her seminal work, that is the origin of totalitarianism, it provides a comprehensive analysis of the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. Right, in the 20th century, and she traces the roots of totalitarianism to the traditional institutions like rise of imperialism, right? If you remember the concept of white man supremacy, white man white man supremacy, right? And to prove this idea, there was a promulgation of idea of Aryan supremacy, right? अगर आपको मालूम होगा दोस्तों कैसे अंग्रेजों ने अपनी व्हाइट मैन सुप्रीमेसी, अपने बेनेवलेंट डेस्पोटिज्म को इस्टेब्लिश करने के लिए, प्रोपगेट करने के लिए अपनी कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ आर्यन सुप्रीमेसी को दिया था, राइट? तो यहीं से वो ईगो, वो गॉड कॉम्प्लेक्स क्रिएट हुआ जो टोटलिटेरियन रिजाइम को बर्थ दिया 20th सेंचुरी यूरोप में, right? So this is how Anna Arendt traces the roots of totalitarianism to the rise of imperialism and emergence of mass society in the modern era, that is 20th century, right? So the first and foremost is the origin of totalitarianism itself, which is being criticized by the Hannah Arendt, right? And she says that because of the rise of institutions like imperialism, it gave rise to the origin of totalitarianism. The second one is totalitarianism as a new form of government. Why new form of government? Because it was unprecedented. It was unprecedented. There was authority, there was a tyrannical or dictatorial government which has existed in history, but totalitarian was something very, very different. Totalitarian was something very, very grave, right? Why? Because it did not only seek to control political life but also penetrate every aspect of society, including private sphere, right? It was all pervasive. It was not only confined till the political life, right? Political dissent, disagreement. It tried to control all sphere of people's life, from education to economy to culture to religion and etc., right? That is why totalitarianism is completely a new form of government which is unprecedented, right? This is the second criticism. The third criticism is role of ideology. What is role of ideology? So Arendt, she emphasizes the central role of ideology in totalitarian regime, right? So ideology, it becomes a central role. Why? Because through ideology they spread their propaganda, right? And what does this propaganda do? It helps the regime to shape the opinion, to shape the values, to shape the world views of the public, so that they can align with the state ideology, right? This is how the ideology becomes a central role in the totalitarian regime, right? It creates a sense of pseudo reality and coherence worldview that justifies the regime's action, that is the suppression and dissent, right? It justifies, through propagation of ideology, it justifies the terror that is being created by the totalitarian regime, right? The fourth one is bureaucratic structure, right? How Anna Arendt is criticizing the bureaucratic structure. So Arendt highlights the importance of bureaucracy in totalitarian regime, right? She argues that bureaucracy serves as the administrative arm of the regime, implementing its policies with ruthless efficiency. And the best example is epitomized in her work, that is Eichmann in Jerusalem, right? Where Adolf Eichmann, who was a bureaucrat, who was a thoughtless bureaucrat who was following the orders of the totalitarian Hitler regime ruthlessly, which led to the genocide in Germany, right? So how the bureaucracy, they become thoughtless, again through ideology, through propaganda, right? They do not realize the enormity of the crime that they are committing, or enormity of the consequences that was the result of the action they were engaging in. That is why the bureaucratic structure, it becomes a means to their violence. It becomes means to the terror that was an end, right? So this is how she is criticizing the bureaucratic structure in totalitarian regime. The fourth one is manipulation of language and truth, right? So Arendt explores how totalitarian regimes manipulate language and truth to maintain power, right? manipulate language and maintain truth. This is what? This is nothing but a propaganda. This is what? This is propaganda. Propaganda is devised in such a manner that it leads to the manipulation of the truth and what? The language, right? Through propaganda, censorship, and rewriting of history, they seek to create false reality in which regime's actions are justified and dissent is suppressed, right? Again, the best example is the Aryans supremacy, right? Aryans supremacy. That is why it becomes very crucial for the people to have a balanced view, people. Right? It becomes a very, very important to have a balanced worldview. Why? Because today is the time of media and today is the time of propaganda. We cannot easily trust any news that we hear because there is always a sense of interest hidden in it. There is always a sense of propaganda hidden in it. And if we consume that media directly without processing, without our own justification, then it is nothing but a propaganda. And we are just being an innocent victim to the propaganda of the regime, irrespective of the countries we reside in, right? That is why whatever you consume, be very much mindful about it. आप चाहे वो फेसबुक से कंज्यूम कर रहे हैं या यूट्यूब से कंज्यूम कर रहे हैं या फिर किसी भी सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म या ट्रेडिशनल मीडिया से कंज्यूम कर रहे हैं, ऑलवेज हैव योर जस्टिफिकेशन, ऑलवेज हैव योर ओपिनियन, ऑलवेज हैव योर ओन processing in place in order to have a balanced view of it, right? आप किसी भी सच को सच ना मान ले जब तक आप उसके गहराई तक ना जाएं, right? Don't believe something as you see, right? Again, know the concept of phenomenology, right? Phenomenology. आप किसी चीज को easily भरोसा ना करें जब तक आप उसे अपने कॉन्शियसनेस में एक्सपीरियंस एंड फील कर पा रहे हैं, right? So this is how she criticizes totalitarianism, that the manipulation of language and truth through propaganda is a foundation of totalitarianism, right? The seventh one is banality of evil. What is banality of evil? In her coverage of Eichmann trials, that is in her work that is Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on banality of evil, Arendt introduces the concept of banality of evil, right? So banality of the evil basically comes from her work that is Eichmann in Jerusalem, right? So in this particular work, she argues that ordinary individuals can become complicit in totalitarian atrocities, right? What does this mean? That ordinary people can become complicit in totalitarian authorities through thoughtlessness. Their daily activities leads to qualitative consequence. Whenever we go to our day-to-day work, friend, right, after some point of time it becomes thoughtless, right? If let's say we are executor, if we are an IS officer, right, and our daily job is to sign the checks, right? If our daily job is to sign the check for the tenders and etc., right, we will do it thinking that it will be a money that will be used for the development of infrastructure. But what if the money that you are sanctioning through your fund is being used for any malicious practices by the system, by the government, right? Let's say it is being used for any illegal purpose like mining. We never know, right? We never know. And this is how the banality of evil is taking shape, right? Through the daily thoughtless activities, we do not realize the enormity of the consequences this action can lead to, right? And hence we become an innocent victim of the totalitarian regime, right? And this is how the normal people, they fall prey of it, right? So the last critic of totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt is the loss of individuality and plurality, right? As we have already discussed, how plurality is the natural law, right? Plurality is the natural truth. Diversity is the natural truth. But here Hannah Arendt laments the loss of individuality and plurality in totalitarian society. Why? Because totalitarian seeks to homogenize and atomize the population, erasing distinction between individual and reducing them to a mere cogs in the machinery of the state, right? So by eliminating all the dissent, by eliminating all the disagreement, by eliminating all the individualities, the totalitarian regime, they creates man as a mere cog in the machinery of the state, in the machinery of the state, right? And this is how the plurality, the diversity, the perspective and opinions is suppressed in the totalitarian regime, right? So with this, we are done with today's lecture, people. But before ending today's lecture, again, I would like to take you back to these PYQs and try attempting this particular PYQ, that is question number 2. Discuss Hannah Arendt's analysis of the role of ideology, right? What is the role of ideology? As I have already discussed, how through ideology, through ideological coherence, through propaganda, the modern totalitarian regime is established, right? So we have to talk about the role of ideology in modern totalitarian regime. And the third question is, power is never a property of an individual. It belongs to a group and remains in existence only so long as the group keeps it together, right? So again, here you have to talk about how totalitarian regime basically promotes the idea of cult personality, right? A one-man show, right? So with this particular context, we have to talk how the power, the concentration of power in any single hand can lead to a devastation of regime, like in the totalitarianism, right? So try attempting these 2 questions, friends, and try sharing me the question in the Telegram link that I will share in the description box. Try joining the community. There we usually share materials, resources that is very, very beneficial and useful for our UPSC preparation, right? So with this, we are done with today's lecture, friend. Thank you so much for watching. And if you really like the lectures, as I am getting a lot of feedbacks, lot of appraisals, and I really I am grateful to all of you friends for showering me immense love, right? So my only request is that keep showering your love, and also show your love by liking, subscribing, and sharing this particular video with your close ones. So with this, let's end today's lecture, and until very next time, this is your friend, host, and guide Naman signing off. Keep watching, keep learning.